All right, everyone, let's get right into it. Today, we're going to unravel the absolutely epic story of the United States, how it went from just a few scattered colonies to a major global force.
So, how did this happen? How did a few little coastal settlements turn into a global superpower in really just a couple hundred years? Well, the answer is complicated. It involves incredible speed, massive growth, and a whole series of huge conflicts that basically kept reshaping what the nation even was.
So, where do we start? Well, it all begins with that first spark, right? You've got this global race for a piece of the quote-unquote New World. On one hand, you have these big European empires looking for wealth and power. And on the other, you have the actual settlers. And a lot of them were just hoping for a new life, maybe some freedom they couldn't get back home.
And this map here, it just illustrates that first chapter perfectly. I mean, look at it. By the mid-1600s, you can see these major European powers, England, France, Spain, they've all staked their claims on North America. They set up colonies for everything from trade to grabbing resources, and of course, for people to actually live there. And this, as you can imagine, changed the continent forever.
And the speed at which things changed was just revolutionary. Seriously, in less than 200 years, you go from these scattered little English colonies to a place with its own unique American identity. And that new identity, it led them to revolt against the British and create something totally new, a whole new form of government, all built on the ideas in the Constitution.
But here's the thing, and it's a huge thing. This new nation was basically founded on a massive, dangerous contradiction, right? While this revolutionary government is promising freedom and liberty for all, it's also legally protecting the institution of slavery. That conflict, that was baked right into the country's DNA from day one, and it was absolutely setting the stage for the next major crisis.
So, let's look at how that deep division just festered and grew until it almost ripped the young country completely in two.
And you can really see that divide right here. I mean, you basically had two different Americas. The North was all about industry, commerce, paid labor. They'd abolished slavery by the early 1800s. But the South, its economy was agricultural, totally dependent on crops like cotton, and that whole system was built on the backs of enslaved people.
So you've got this massive economic and moral tension, and it just explodes into a political crisis. The big fight was over the new territories out west. Were they going to allow slavery or not? When Abraham Lincoln got elected in 1860, promising to stop slavery from spreading, that was it. The southern states seceded, they formed the Confederacy, and in 1861, the Civil War began. It was brutal, lasted 4 years, and would completely redefine the nation.
And this quote, "The Civil War ended slavery, but it did not end racism." It just perfectly captures the complicated legacy of the war, doesn't it? Yeah, the Union was saved and slavery was abolished. But the end of the fighting was really just the beginning of a whole new struggle called Reconstruction, a long, often painful process.
Okay, so the country is one piece again, politically at least. But now what? Well, a whole new engine was about to fire up. And this time, it wasn't on a battlefield, it was in the factory. We're talking about the rise of industry.
You kind of had this perfect storm of factors all coming together in the mid-1800s. First, you've got tons of natural resources coming from the West, all the metals and fuels you could want. Then you've got all these new inventions making production way faster and cheaper. And finally, the population is booming. Put it all together, you get an absolute explosion of industrial growth that changes, well, pretty much everything about American cities and society.
Now, all these new factories needed workers, a lot of workers, and that drew millions of immigrants. What's so interesting if you look at this chart from the 1890s is where they came from. I mean, a staggering 97% came from Europe.
Okay, but now let's jump forward about 100 years. Look at this. What a dramatic shift. The biggest groups of immigrants are now coming from the Americas and Asia. It's just a fantastic illustration of how much the face of America has really fundamentally changed over time.
But let's go back to that first big industrial boom. All that rapid growth created a ton of wealth, for sure, but it also created a ton of new problems. We're talking grueling work, really low pay, awful urban slums. And all of this sparked the Progressive Era, a time when people started demanding major reforms.
So this new industrial power wasn't just a domestic thing. Oh no, it was about to push the United States onto the world stage in a very, very big way. Think about it. All those factories needed two things: raw materials to run and new customers to buy their stuff. So the US started looking overseas. It basically adopted the policy of imperialism, which is just a way of saying a stronger nation extends its control, whether it's economic, military, or political, over a weaker one.
And once you're playing on the world stage like that, you're going to get pulled into global conflicts. It's almost inevitable. It started with the Spanish-American War in 1898, where the U.S. acquired some of Spain's colonies. Then it got pulled into World War I. And of course, the bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941 dragged the U.S. right into the center of World War II, cementing its role as a huge military power.
But here's the twist. The end of World War II didn't really bring peace. It just started a new kind of conflict, the Cold War. This was a long, tense power struggle against the communist Soviet Union, and it was dominated by a brand new, absolutely terrifying reality. And this political cartoon, man, it just captures the feeling of the Cold War so perfectly. You see these two guys holding nuclear bombs over each other's heads, and one says, "Ah, peace and stability through nuclear balance. If only my arms would stop trembling." That was it. That was the peace of the Cold War, a peace that was only held together by the constant threat that if one side pushed the button, the other would too. And it would be the end of everything.
So while all this is happening on the global stage, the country was also being forced to look inward. The post-war era brought a whole new set of challenges, forcing America to really confront its own internal contradictions.
You know, it's pretty ironic. The U.S. is out there in the world fighting this global battle for freedom and democracy, but back home, the country had to face its own hypocrisy. The civil rights movement rose up in the 1950s and 60s to fight segregation and discrimination, powerfully demanding that America finally live up to its own founding promises of equality for all its citizens. Fast forward to more recent times, and we find another double-edged sword, technology. On one hand, it's given us amazing things, right? Instant communication, a global village. But on the other hand, it's created a whole new set of problems. Things like pollution, hazardous waste, and serious environmental damage that we're still grappling with.
So when you look back, from the Revolution to the Civil War, from industrialization to global conflict, the story of the United States really is one of constant conflict and constant reinvention. A recurring theme seems to be that the solution to one problem often creates the next one. Which leaves us with the big final question, doesn't it? What's the next chapter going to be?